My mother-in-law, Camilla, was currently texting me a heart emoji while simultaneously evicting me from my own home. I stood in the freezing mud staring at the rotting wooden structure that was supposed to be my generous inheritance, while my phone buzzed with her message. She wrote that she hoped I was settling in, and that this place was so much more me than the manor ever was. She thought she had buried me out here in the middle of nowhere. She didn't know she had just handed me the shovel I needed to dig up her grave. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. The coffee in my styrofoam cup had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but I kept lifting it to my lips anyway. It was a shield. As long as I was drinking, I didn't have to speak. As long as the cup was in front of my face, I could hide the tremor in my chin that threatened to turn into a full-blown sob. I stood in the corner of the grand foyer, my back pressed against the silk wallpaper that probably cost more than my father made in a year. The air smelled of expensive lilies and even more expensive perfume, the scent of old money morning. It was suffocating. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the cold coffee against the pristine white wall and watch the stains spread just to prove that something here was real, that the mess inside me could exist in this perfect, polished world. But I didn't. I just stood there, clutching the cup until my knuckles turned white. Across the room, Camilla was holding court. My mother-in-law looked immaculate in black Chanel, her silver hair coiffed into a helmet of unshakable authority. She didn't look like a woman who had just buried her only son. She looked like a CEO handling a merger gone slightly wrong. Unfortunate, but manageable. I watched her intercept Mrs. Higgins, the bakery owner who had actually liked Blake. Mrs. Higgins was heading my way, a Tupperware container of brownies in her hands, her face crumpled with genuine sympathy. I braced myself. I needed a hug. I needed someone to look at me and acknowledge that I was the widow, that I was the one who had woken up alone in a king-sized bed for the last 7 days. Camilla moved with the speed of a striking viper. She stepped between us, placing a manicured hand on Mrs. Higgins' arm. I couldn't hear the words from this distance, but I knew the script. I saw Camilla tilt her head, her expression shifting into a mask of tragic concern. She glanced back at me, shook her head slightly, and lowered her voice. Toxic benevolence. That was her superpower. Mrs. Higgins paused, looked at me with pity, and then nodded. She handed the brownies to Camilla and turned away. My stomach twisted. I wanted to march over there. I wanted to ask what she had said, but I knew. She had told her I was fragile. She had said I was unstable or not lucid. She was protecting the guests from my grief and protecting the family reputation from the embarrassment of the waitress Blake had married. Francine appeared at my elbow, making me jump. Blake's sister smelled like menthol cigarettes and judgment. "You're vibrating, Layla," she said softly, not looking at me. She was busy typing on her phone, probably checking the stock prices or her Instagram engagement. "It's making people uncomfortable." "I'm sad, Francine," I whispered, my voice raspy from days of crying. "I'm vibrating because I'm trying not to fall apart." Francine finally looked up. Her eyes were dry. They had been dry at the graveside, too. "Well, try harder. Mother is already stressed enough with the estate transition. She doesn't need you making a scene. Just go upstairs if you can't handle the social aspect. We can tell everyone you have a migraine." Again. I looked at her, searching for a shred of the sister-in-law I had tried to befriend for 5 years. "He was your brother," I said. It was a weak accusation, but it was all I had. "And he's gone," she said, her voice flat. "Falling to pieces in the foyer won't bring him back, but it will ruin the carpet. Go upstairs, Layla. The adults have business to discuss." I retreated. I walked up the marble staircase, feeling the eyes of 100 strangers on my back. I felt like a child sent to her room, not the lady of the house, but that was the truth of it, wasn't it? I had never been the lady of the house. I had just been a guest who overstayed her welcome, and now that the host was dead, the eviction was inevitable. The lawyer's office smelled of leather, and old dust. Mr. Thorne sat behind a desk that was wide enough to land a plane on, shuffling papers with a nervous energy that made me nauseous. I sat in the middle chair. Camilla was to my right, sitting so still she could have been a statue. Francine was to my left, aggressively checking her watch every 30 seconds. "Let's proceed," Camilla said, her voice cutting through the silence. "We have a schedule to keep." Mr. Thorne cleared his throat. He looked at me, then quickly looked away. That was the first warning sign. A lawyer who can't make eye contact is a lawyer who is about to deliver bad news. "The last will and testament of Blake Alexander Hartley," he began. I tuned out the legalese. I was thinking about Blake. I was thinking about the way he used to hum when he made coffee in the morning. I was thinking about the secret smile he gave me across the dinner table when his mother was monologuing about charity galas. How could that vibrant, warm man be reduced to a stack of papers on a mahogany desk? "To my mother, Camilla Hartley," Mr. Thorne read, and the room seemed to drop a few degrees. "I leave the family estate at Rosewood Drive, including all furnishings, art collections, and grounds." Camilla didn't blink. She just nodded as if acknowledging the sunrise. It was inevitable. It was hers by divine right. "To my sister, Francine Hartley," Thorne continued. "I leave my controlling interest in Hartley Enterprises, along with the investment portfolio attached to the primary trust." Francine let out a small, sharp exhale. "Finally," she muttered under her breath. I felt a cold numbness spreading from my fingertips up my arms. The house, the company, the money, everything that made up our life, our security. Blake had promised me I would be taken care of. He had told me, late one night when his heart was fluttering in his chest, "I've made sure you're safe, Layla. Trust me." "And regarding my wife, Layla Hartley," Thorne said. His voice wavered. Camilla shifted in her seat. She turned her body slightly toward me, a predator orienting on prey. "I leave the property located in Wolf Creek, along with the land surveying title associated with it." Silence. Absolute ringing silence. Then Francine laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was a bark of genuine amusement. "Wolf Creek? You mean the shack? Granddad's hunting mistake?" I looked at Mr. Thorne. "I don't understand. What about, didn't he mention our savings? The joint accounts?" Thorne looked at the paper, then at Camilla. "The accounts were restructured prior to his passing. They are part of the estate now owned by Mrs. Camilla Hartley." I felt the blood drain from my face. Restructured? But that was our money. My salary went into those accounts too. "Oh, sweetie," Camilla said. Her voice was dripping with that toxic sweetness again. She reached out and patted my hand. "Let's not be petty about nickels and dimes. Blake knew you weren't equipped to handle the complexities of the estate. The taxes alone would crush you." "I can do math, Camilla." "I was a waitress, not an idiot," I snapped, pulling my hand away. "It's a kindness," Francine chimed in, leaning forward. "Really, Wolf Creek is perfect for you. It's rustic, quiet, far away from the pressures of society. Blake knew you never really fit in here. He was setting you free." "It's a ruin," I said, my voice rising. "I've heard Blake talk about it. It hasn't been inhabited in 20 years. It's in the middle of a swamp." "It's a property," Camilla corrected firmly. "A roof over your head, which is more than most people with your background have. You should be grateful he left you anything considering." "Considering what?" I demanded. "Considering you were clearly a phase," Francine said, examining her manicure. "A lovely, quaint little phase. But the phase is over, dear, and the assets need to stay with the people who know how to manage them." Mr. Thorne looked like he wanted to dissolve into his chair. "Mrs. Hartley, Layla, the will is ironclad." Blake was of sound mind. I stared at them. My husband had left me a shack and given his family everything. It felt like a slap from the grave. Why? Why would he do this? Was it true? Was I just a pet project he got bored of before he died? The meeting ended with a signature I barely remembered writing. I walked out of the office in a daze, but Camilla and Francine were right on my heels. They weren't done. "So," Francine said, clapping her hands together as we reached the elevator. "Logistics." "I need time," I said, leaning against the elevator wall. "I need to figure out what to do with the Wolf Creek place. See if it's even livable." "Oh, you won't have time for that," Camilla said breezily. "We have the stagers coming on Monday." I blinked, trying to clear the fog in my brain. "Stagers? For what?" "For the house, obviously," Francine said. "We're liquidating the Rosewood property. Too many bad memories. We need to get it on the market while the sympathy for the tragic Hartley widow is still trending. It adds value." "Liquidating?" I stared at her. "That's my home. I live there." "Not anymore," Camilla said gently. "Technically, it's my home, and I've decided to sell. The stagers need a blank canvas, Layla. Personal items are just clutter." "You can't just kick me out," I said. My voice sounded thin, pathetic. "It's been a week." "We aren't kicking you out," Camilla said, looking offended. "We are helping you launch your new life. Dragging this out is only going to hurt you more. It's like a Band-Aid, darling. Rip it off. You have 24 hours. 24 hours, I choked on the air. To pack 5 years of my life? "Oh, you won't be packing everything," Francine corrected. "Just your things. The estate lawyers have a very specific inventory of what constitutes Hartley family assets. We'll help you sort it. We wouldn't want you to accidentally take something that doesn't belong to you. That would be theft." She smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. I looked at the elevator numbers ticking down. 3, 2, 1. I felt trapped. I had no money. My cards had been declined at the coffee shop this morning. I had assumed it was a bank error. Now I knew it was a restructuring. "Where am I supposed to go tomorrow?" I asked. "Wolf Creek," Camilla exclaimed, as if proposing a vacation to the Maldives. "It's an adventure, Layla. Go back to your roots. Embrace the simple life. You'll be so much happier without the burden of expectations." The next morning, my bedroom, our bedroom, felt like a crime scene. Francine stood by the door with a clipboard while Camilla sat in the armchair, sipping tea and directing the operation. "The jewelry," Camilla said, pointing to the velvet box on the dresser. I clutched the diamond necklace Blake had given me for our 2nd anniversary. This was a gift. He gave this to me. "Bought with the company credit card," Francine noted, not even looking up from her list. "Technically, that makes it corporate property. Embezzlement, really, if we let you keep it. Hand it over." "It's engraved," I said, my hands shaking. "It says, 'To my forever.'" "We can melt it down," Camilla said with a shrug. "The gold is the asset, Layla. The sentiment is depreciated." I dropped the necklace into the box Francine was holding. It hit the bottom with a hollow thud. "The books," Camilla pointed to the shelves. "Those are paperbacks," I argued. "I bought them with my tips before I even met him." "Are you sure?" Francine narrowed her eyes. "Some of those look like first editions. Better to be safe. Leave them." I felt a scream building in my throat, a hot, jagged thing that wanted to tear its way out, but I swallowed it. I swallowed it because I was outnumbered, outfunded, and exhausted. "The clothes," Camilla waved a hand at the closet. "Designer pieces stay. Anything with a label from Paris or Milan is an investment asset. You can keep what is it you wear? The polyester blends?" I spent the next 3 hours stripping my life down to the bone. I packed my old jeans, the t-shirts I slept in, the heavy winter coat I had owned since college. I packed the photos of my parents. When I reached for the framed photo of Blake and me from our wedding day, Francine stepped in. "The frame is sterling silver," she said, holding out her hand. "I just want the photo," I pleaded. Tears were finally spilling over, hot and humiliating. "Please, Francine, it's just a piece of paper." She hesitated, then looked at Camilla. Camilla sighed as if granting a pardon to a murderer. "Let her have the paper, Francine. We're not monsters. I took the photo out of the frame with trembling fingers. I tucked it into my suitcase between a sweater and a pair of worn-out sneakers. "Is that it?" Francine asked, looking at my single suitcase. "Good. The cleaners are coming at noon to sanitize the room." Sanitize? As if I were a disease they were finally curing. "You're making a mistake," I said, zipping up the bag. "Blake loved me. He wouldn't have wanted this." Camilla stood up, smoothing her skirt. She walked over to me and looked me dead in the eye. Blake was a romantic fool, Layla. He picked up a stray puppy because he thought it was cute. But puppies grow up and they make messes, and eventually you have to put them outside where they belong. We're just finishing what he didn't have the heart to do. The taxi driver looked at my suitcase, then at the mansion behind me, and then at my face. "Heading to the airport, miss?" he asked, popping the trunk. "No," I said, checking the piece of paper where Mr. Thorne had written the address. Wolf Creek. 1190 Blackwood Road. The driver froze. He looked at me like I had just asked him to drive me to the moon. Wolf Creek? Lady, that's 3 hours north, and that ain't exactly a residential area. That's swamp country. "I know," I said. "Just drive." I got into the back seat. As we pulled away, I didn't look back at the mansion. I couldn't. I was too busy mentally balancing my checkbook. I had checked my mobile banking app in the hallway. $284. That was it. That was my net worth. The joint account was locked. The credit cards were canceled. I had $284 to start a new life. The meter on the dashboard ticked up. $5, $10. Panic started to set in, a cold grip on my lungs. The fare to Wolf Creek was going to cost at least $200. I would have nothing left for food, nothing for utilities. "You got family up there?" the driver asked, eyeing me in the rearview mirror. "No," I said. Friends? No. Just going to the swamp in the rain? "Apparently," I muttered. I watched the city fade away, replaced by suburbs, then strip malls, and finally, endless stretches of gray, wet pine trees. The rain started hammering against the roof of the car, a relentless rhythm that matched the pounding in my head. I kept thinking about Blake. The betrayal was a physical weight in my gut. How could he? How could the man who held me while I cried over a sad movie, the man who brought me soup when I had the flu, leave me to this? Was it all a lie? Was I really just a charity case to him? "We're getting close," the driver said, slowing down. "Road's running out, though. Pavement ends here." The car bumped onto a dirt track. Mud splattered against the windows. The trees pressed in closer, blocking out the gray afternoon light. It felt like we were driving into the mouth of a tunnel with no exit. "This is it," the driver said. He didn't sound convinced. I looked out the window and felt my heart stop. Camilla had called it a property. Francine had called it a shack. Both of them were lying. It was a corpse of a house. The structure leaned dangerously to the left, as if trying to lie down in the mud and give up. The roof was a patchwork of moss and missing shingles. The windows were boarded up with wood that had turned gray and slimy with rot. The porch was collapsed on one side. It wasn't a home. It was a place where teenagers went to dare each other to spend the night before running away screaming. "That's 1190, the driver said, pointing to a rusted metal number nailed to a tree. "You sure about this, lady? I can take you back to town. There's a Motel 6 near the highway." I looked at the meter. $195. If I went back, I wouldn't have enough money to pay for the room. I would be homeless in a town I didn't know. Here, at least, I owned the rot. "No," I said, forcing my voice to be steady. "This is home." I handed him the cash. It hurt to let go of the bills. I kept $20 for myself. $20 to survive indefinitely. I stepped out of the car. The mud immediately sucked at my sneakers, cold and wet. The rain was freezing, soaking through my coat in seconds. The driver hauled my suitcase out of the trunk and set it on the only patch of dry-ish grass. "Good luck," he said. He sounded like he was saying, Rest in peace. He got back in the car and reversed quickly, tires spinning in the slop before catching traction. He drove away as fast as he could, taillights disappearing into the gloom. I was alone. I stood there, shivering, staring at the monster Blake had left me. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out with numb fingers. It was the text from Camilla. "Hope you're settling in, sweetie. It's so much more you than the manor, isn't it?" I looked at the rotting wood. I looked at the dark, gaping hole where the front door should have been. "Okay," I whispered to the rain. "Okay, Blake, you want me to be a survivor? Fine. But if I survive this, I am coming for them." The rain was no longer just falling. It was being driven sideways by a wind that felt personal. I stood on the rotting porch, shielding my eyes, staring at the front door. It wasn't locked. There wasn't even a keyhole on the handle, just a rusted latch that looked like it belonged on a barn. But it wouldn't move. I pushed against the wood. It was swollen tight, fused to the frame by years of humidity and neglect. "Come on," I grunted, throwing my shoulder against it. "Please." The wood groaned, but it didn't budge. I stepped back, wiping water out of my eyes. This was it. This was my life now, fighting with a door in the middle of a swamp while my husband's family drank champagne in a climate-controlled mansion. I thought about Camilla's text. "So much more you." She knew. She knew this place was a wreck. She probably pictured me curling up on the wet porch like a stray dog, waiting for the cold to take me. Rage is a surprisingly good heater. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. I wasn't going to die on the porch. I stepped back, gripped the handle of my suitcase for balance, and kicked the door right next to the latch. Wood splintered. A sharp crack echoed through the trees. I kicked it again, screaming a word I never used in polite society. On the third kick, the rotted wood around the latch gave way, and the door swung inward with a shriek of rusted hinges. I stumbled inside, dragging my suitcase behind me, and slammed the door shut. It didn't latch, so I shoved a heavy, moldy armchair in front of it. Then the smell hit me. It smelled like wet wool, dead mice, and thyme. It was the smell of a place that had been holding its breath for 2 decades. I coughed, covering my nose with my sleeve. It was pitch black. The boarded-up windows let in 0 light. I fumbled for my phone. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The room was a time capsule of poverty. There was a sagging sofa covered in a sheet that had turned gray, a fireplace choked with bird nests, a table with 3 legs. I swung the light around. Shadows jumped at me from the corners. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. I was 30 years old, but in the dark, I felt like a terrified child. "Hello?" I whispered. Silence. Just the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls. I walked to the center of the room. The floorboards felt spongy under my sneakers. I was afraid that if I took a wrong step, I would fall straight through to the crawlspace and be eaten by whatever lived down there. I needed to sleep. My body was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering, but there was no bed, no mattress, just the sofa that looked like a crime scene. I opened my suitcase and pulled out every piece of clothing I had. I put on 3 sweaters. I wrapped my jeans around my legs. I cleared a spot on the floor near the fireplace. It seemed like the structurally strongest part of the room, and curled up on my pile of clothes. I used the suitcase as a pillow. It was hard and dug into my neck. I kept my phone clutched in my hand, the flashlight turned off to save battery. The darkness was absolute. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Blake's face. I saw him smiling at me at the altar. I saw him lying in the casket. And then I heard Francine's voice, clear as a bell in the quiet dark. "The phase is over, dear." I lay there shivering, listening to the rain rot my inheritance, and I made a promise to the ceiling I couldn't see. I wasn't going to cry tonight. I was done crying for them. I woke up because a beam of light was burning a hole in my eyelid. I groaned and tried to roll over, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My back was locked in a spasm of pain. Sleeping on hardwood floorboards when you are stressed and malnourished is not something the human body enjoys. I sat up, cracking my neck. The room looked different in the daylight. It was worse. The sun was streaming through the gaps in the boarded windows, creating long, dusty stripes across the floor. In the light, I could see the extent of the damage. The wallpaper was peeling in long, sunburnt strips, revealing the lath and plaster underneath. There were water stains on the ceiling that looked like maps of countries that didn't exist. My throat felt like I had swallowed a handful of sand. Thirst. It was a sharp, primal demand. I pushed myself up, my knees popping, and grabbed my phone. 7:15 in the morning. Battery at 64%. No signal. Of course. I walked into the kitchen. It was a narrow galley with linoleum that was curling up at the edges. There was a sink that was more rust than porcelain. I reached for the tap. My hand hesitated. Please work, I prayed. Just give me this one thing. I turned the handle. It squeaked, grinding metal on metal. Nothing happened. No hiss of air, no drip, just silence. Great, I croaked. Perfect. I tried the light switch on the wall. Click. Nothing. No water, no power. I checked the stove. It was gas, but when I turned the knob, there was no hiss of propane. The tank outside was probably empty or rusted through. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, panic fluttering in my chest like a trapped bird. I had $20. I had half a bottle of water left in my purse from the funeral, and I was miles from the nearest town. Think, Layla, I said aloud. My voice sounded small in the empty house. You fixed the espresso machine at the diner when the mechanic was on strike. You can figure this out. I looked out the window over the sink. Through the grime, I could see the backyard. It was a jungle of overgrown briars and kudzu, but near the corner of the house, I saw a concrete box set into the ground. A well cap? A city connection? I didn't know. But I knew that water didn't just appear by magic. It had to come from somewhere. And if I wanted to drink today without walking 10 miles, I had to find the source. The backyard was an obstacle course designed by nature to hurt me. I stepped off the back porch and immediately sank to my ankles in mud. The briars grabbed at my jeans, their thorns snagging the denim. I swatted them away, cursing as a thorn sliced across the back of my hand. I waded through the weeds toward the concrete box. It was covered in a layer of dead leaves and slime. I kicked the debris away. It was a metal access panel set into a concrete ring. I hooked my fingers under the edge of the metal lid and pulled. It was heavy, cast iron. I gritted my teeth and heaved, straining my back until the lid flipped over with a clang. I looked down. It was a dark hole, smelling of wet earth. About 2 feet down, I saw a pipe and a wheel valve. It looked like something from the Titanic, red with rust, caked in mud. I reached down. The hole was narrow. My shoulder scraped against the concrete. I grabbed the wheel with both hands and tried to turn it counterclockwise. Lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. It was frozen solid. "No," I grunted, twisting with all my weight. "Move!" It didn't move. The rust had fused it into a solid block of metal. I stood up, breathing hard. My hands were already coated in orange rust dust. I needed leverage. I scanned the yard. No tools. No shed, just debris. I saw a rock near the fence line. It wasn't a perfect hammer, but it was heavy and jagged. I grabbed it and marched back to the hole. "I hate you," I told the valve. "I hate you, and I hate this house, and I hate Camilla." I brought the rock down on the side of the wheel. Clang. I hit it again. Clang. I was hammering out my frustration. Every strike was a scream I couldn't release. I hit it until my arm burned. I hit it until I chipped the rock. I dropped the rock and reached down again. I grabbed the wheel. My skin slipped on the wet metal. I took a breath, braced my feet in the mud, and screamed as I twisted. Screech! The metal shrieked, a sound like a dying animal. It moved, just an inch. Yes, I gasped. I twisted again, another inch. Then it gave way, turning freely. I spun it until it hit the stop. From deep inside the house, I heard a sound, a shudder, a bang, and then the faint, beautiful hiss of pressurized pipes filling up. I scrambled out of the mud and ran back inside. I burst into the kitchen and stared at the faucet. It was coughing, sputtering air and brown sludge. Splat. A glob of brown water hit the sink, then a steady stream of liquid that looked like chocolate milk. I let it run. I watched it, mesmerized. Slowly, the brown faded to tan, then to a cloudy gray, and finally to clear. I didn't have a glass. I didn't care. I cupped my hands under the freezing stream and drank. It tasted like iron and victory. I wiped my mouth, leaving a smear of mud on my cheek. I had water. I was alive. Water solved the thirst, but it did nothing for the hunger that was currently trying to digest my own stomach lining. It was noon. I hadn't eaten since the reception, where I'd had half a stale cracker. My blood sugar was crashing. I felt lightheaded, the edges of my vision going fuzzy if I stood up too fast. I needed to inventory the house. Properly this time, not just looking for a bed, but looking for anything that could sustain life. I started in the kitchen. The cupboards were empty. Not just empty of food, but empty of shelves. Someone had stripped this place. The drawers contained 3 dead cockroaches, a twist tie, and a single rusted spoon. I moved to the living room. I checked under the sofa cushions. I found 47 cents in change and a button. Okay, I muttered. 47 cents. That's nearly $50. I went upstairs. The stairs creaked terrifyingly, but they held. There were 2 bedrooms. One was empty, just bare floorboards and peeling wallpaper. The second room, the one facing the backyard, had furniture. A small bed frame with a mattress that looked like it had been home to several generations of squirrels. A wardrobe, and in the corner, a cardboard box sealed with packing tape. My heart skipped a beat. A box. A sealed box meant someone had put something in there and intended to keep it. I knelt beside it. The tape was yellow and brittle. I used my house key, the key to the mansion that I still had on my keychain, a cruel souvenir, to slice through the tape. I opened the flaps. My shoulders slumped. It wasn't food. It wasn't survival gear. It was junk. "Are you kidding me?" I whispered. I pulled out the items one by one. An old college textbook on economics, a hideous green sweater that looked like it had shrunk in the wash, a stack of National Geographic magazines from 1998. I recognized this stuff. This was the donation box Francine had packed up for Blake years ago when he moved into the mansion. She had called it clearing out the bachelor pad debris. Blake had laughed and said he'd deal with it later. Apparently, dealing with it meant shipping it to a shack in the swamp and forgetting it existed. I dug to the bottom, hoping for a forgotten granola bar. My fingers brushed against something cold and ceramic. I pulled it out. It was the dog. It was a ceramic bulldog, about 6 inches tall, painted with a grotesque expression of surprise. One eye was larger than the other. It was wearing a painted-on bow tie. I stared at it. I remembered this dog. Blake had bought it at a garage sale on our 3rd date as a joke. He named it Sir Barkaby. I hated it. I told him it was cursed. He used to hide it in the pantry to scare me. "Hello, Sir Barkaby," I said, my voice trembling. "You made it to the swamp, too?" I held the ugly thing in my hands. It was heavy. Seeing it brought a wave of grief so fresh and sharp it knocked the wind out of me. It was a piece of the Blake I loved, the funny, silly Blake, not the man who hid assets and left me destitute. "Why did you keep this?" I asked the ceramic dog. "Why this, and not me?" I sat back on my heels, holding the statue. I was so hungry, so tired, and so incredibly angry. "You're smiling," I said to the bulldog. "Stop smiling at me." The painted grin mocked me. It was the same toxic positivity the Hartleys used. "Smile through the pain, Layla. It's just a little poverty, Layla." I said, "Stop it." I stood up and threw the dog. I didn't mean to aim for the wall, but I did. I threw it with all the strength in my malnourished arm. It hit the plaster next to the wardrobe with a satisfying crack. Ceramic shards exploded outward. The head of Sir Barkaby rolled across the floor. I stood there, breathing heavy, feeling a moment of petty satisfaction. Then guilt washed over me. I had just broken one of the few things of Blake's I had left. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm losing my mind." I walked over to clean up the mess. I knelt down to pick up the pieces. I reached for the main body of the dog, which had split in half, and then I froze. Inside the hollow belly of the ceramic dog, sitting amidst the white dust and shards, was something that wasn't ceramic. It was a small silver key. I stared at it. It wasn't a house key. It was smaller, with a round head and intricate teeth. It looked like a key for a luggage lock or maybe a diary. I picked it up. It was taped to the inside of the ceramic shard with a piece of blue painter's tape. My brain stalled. Taped. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't a manufacturing defect. Someone, Blake, had deliberately taped a key inside the one object he knew I hated, the object he knew I would probably throw away or break. "What are you?" I asked the key. I turned it over in my fingers. There were no markings, no numbers, just a simple silver key hidden in a joke. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. This wasn't junk. This was a message. Adrenaline is a powerful drug. It erased my hunger. It erased my fatigue. I was suddenly wide awake, my mind racing at 1,000 miles an hour. A key opens something. Therefore, there must be a lock. I scrambled up and ran to the wardrobe. I checked the doors. No lock. I checked the drawers inside. No locks. I ran to the other bedroom. I checked the window sills, the floorboards, the closet door. Nothing. I thundered down the stairs. The key clenched in my fist so tight it was cutting into my palm. "Think, Blake," I muttered. "Where? Where would you put it?" I checked the front door. Too small. I checked the kitchen cupboards. No locks. I checked the rusted fuse box in the hallway. No lock. I ran into the living room. I flipped the sofa over, grunting with the effort. I ripped the bottom fabric open, checking for a hidden box. Nothing but dust and springs. I checked the fireplace. I stuck my head up the flue, getting soot in my hair. Nothing. Panic started to creep in, cold and sharp. What if the lock wasn't here? What if the key was for a safety deposit box in a bank in Atlanta? If that was the case, it was useless. I couldn't get back to Atlanta. I couldn't even walk into a bank without identification that proved I was the owner. No, 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 I paced the room. It has to be here. You wouldn't leave me a puzzle I can't solve. You weren't cruel. But maybe he was. Maybe this was the final joke. "Here's a key to a treasure you can't reach, Layla. Hope you enjoyed the scavenger hunt." I tore through the kitchen again. I pulled the drawers out completely and threw them on the floor. I checked the back of the stove. I checked the underside of the sink. Nothing. I went back upstairs. I was panting now, sweat dripping down my back despite the cold. I stood in the middle of the bedroom with the broken dog. I looked at the walls. I ran my hands over the peeling wallpaper, feeling for a bump, a seam, a hidden panel. I clawed at the paper, ripping it down in great sheets. Plaster, just crumbling plaster. I checked the floorboards. They were all nailed down tight. I dropped to my knees in the center of the room. I held the key up to the light. It mocked me. A solution without a problem. An answer without a question. "Where is it?" I screamed. The sound echoed through the empty house. I slumped forward, my forehead resting on the dusty floor. Tears pricked my eyes again. I was so tired of fighting. I was so tired of riddles. I looked sideways, my cheek pressed against the wood. I was looking under the bed. The bed frame was old metal. The mattress was gross. But directly under the center of the bed, in the shadow, I saw something. The floorboard there. It looked different. The gap between the planks was slightly wider. And the nail heads? They were shiny. Every other nail in this house was rusted black. These 2 nails were silver. I sat up slowly. My breath caught in my throat. I crawled under the bed, ignoring the dust bunnies and the spider webs. I touched the board. It was loose. I tried to pry it up with my fingernails. It wiggled, but it wouldn't lift. I needed a tool. I scrambled out, grabbed a piece of the broken ceramic dog, a sharp, curved shard, and crawled back under. I jammed the shard into the gap and levered it down. The board popped up with a groan. I pushed it aside. There was a dark space between the joists, and sitting there, nestled in a bed of pink fiberglass insulation, was a waterproof, black duffel bag. I stared at it. I didn't reach for it immediately. I was afraid that if I touched it, it would turn into smoke. "Found you," I whispered. I stared at the black duffel bag nesting in the pink fiberglass like a dark egg. My heart was hammering a rhythm against my ribs that felt dangerous, too fast for a body running on adrenaline and stale water. I reached out, my hand trembling, and grabbed the nylon handle. It was heavy, heavier than clothes, heavier than books. I dragged it out from between the floor joists. It bumped over the wooden lip of the subfloor and landed on the dusty planks with a solid, muted thud. Dust puffed up around it, making me sneeze. I sat back on my heels, wiping my nose with my sleeve. It was a tactical bag, the kind you see in movies involving spies or special forces, made of thick, waterproof canvas. And there, holding the 2 main zippers together, was a small, silver padlock. I looked at the key in my hand, the key I had dug out of a ceramic dog's stomach. "Please," I whispered, "please don't be for a diary. Please be for this." I brought the key to the lock. My hands were shaking so badly I scratched the metal plate around the keyhole twice before I managed to slide it in. It fit. It slid home with a smooth, oily resistance that spoke of precision engineering. I held my breath and turned it. Click. The sound was small, but in the empty, silent house, it sounded like a gunshot. The shackle popped open. I removed the lock and tossed it on the floor. I gripped the 2 zipper pulls. This was it. Pandora's box. Or maybe just a bag of Blake's old gym clothes. I pulled the zippers apart. The sound of the teeth separating was loud, harsh. I pushed the flaps of the bag open and looked inside. I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. It wasn't clothes. It was organized chaos. It was a survival kit, packed with the kind of obsessive compulsion that Blake usually reserved for his color-coded spreadsheets. I sat there, staring into the bag, feeling a strange mix of terror and comfort. He had packed this. He had touched these things. He had knelt on a floor somewhere, maybe in this very room, and put this together for me. Why? Why would a man who was planning to die of a heart condition pack a bag like he was running from the mob? I started pulling things out, laying them on the dusty floorboards in a semicircle around me. First, there were 4 bottles of water, not the cheap kind, but the high-end electrolyte brand he used to drink after tennis. I cracked one open immediately and drained half of it in one go. The relief was instantaneous. Next, food, ration bars. The heavy, foil-wrapped kind that tasted like sawdust and peanut butter, but contained 2,000 calories a block. I tore one open and took a bite. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. I chewed slowly, my jaw aching, forcing myself not to wolf it down and make myself sick. Then came the hardware, a heavy-duty flashlight, a multi-tool knife, a solar charger, a first aid kit, and then a phone. It was a simple smartphone, black, generic. It was powered off. Taped to the back of it was a charging cable and a small piece of paper with a 4-digit code written on it, 1984, the year I was born. I set the phone aside and reached deeper into the bag. My fingers brushed against paper. I pulled out a thick envelope. It wasn't sealed. I looked inside and gasped, dropping it on the floor. Cash. Stacks of it. I picked it up again, my fingers numb. I counted one stack. They were 50-pound notes, not dollars, pounds, British currency. I flipped through them. There had to be at least 5,000 pounds here. "What is this?" I whispered to the empty room. "Blake, what did you do?" 5,000 pounds. That was... what? $7,000? It was more money than I had ever held in my hands at one time. It was enough to rent an apartment for months. It was enough to buy a car. Why pounds? I reached into the bottom of the bag and found the last item, a white envelope with my name written on the front. Layla. It was his handwriting, that distinctive architectural script, all sharp angles and precise loops. Seeing my name written by his dead hand made my chest constrict so tightly I couldn't breathe. I traced the letters with my thumb, smearing a little bit of dust on the white paper. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper and a boarding pass. I looked at the boarding pass first. Passenger: Layla Hartley. Origin: Atlanta, Hartsfield, Jackson. Destination: London Heathrow. Date: tomorrow. Class: first. I looked at the time on the ticket. The flight left at 6 in the evening. That was 30 hours from now. I unfolded the letter. My hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. I had to lay it flat on the floor and lean over it to read. My dearest Layla, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened. I am gone, and my family has done exactly what I predicted they would do. They have taken the house, they have taken the accounts, and they have exiled you to Wolf Creek. I let out a sob, a sharp, ugly sound. He knew. He had predicted every single move, the cruelty, the eviction, the specific location. I am sorry I couldn't tell you. I am sorry I had to leave you in the dark, but you are a terrible liar, my love. If you had known about the plan, Camilla would have smelled it on you. She would have seen the hope in your eyes, and she would have destroyed you before I was even in the ground. You needed to be truly broken for them to let you go. You needed to be worthless to them. That was the only way they would ignore you. I wiped my eyes, smearing tears and dirt across my face. He had used my grief as a weapon. He had let me suffer. He had let me stand in that funeral reception and feel like I was drowning, just so his mother wouldn't suspect anything. I wanted to be angry, but the logic was terrifyingly sound. Wolf Creek is not just a shack, it is a blind spot. It is the one asset my mother thinks is beneath her notice. That is why I hid the exit here. The money in the bag is for emergencies. The ticket is your escape. You need to go to London. Do not ask why. Do not try to investigate from here. Just get on the plane. When you land, a man named Mr. Thorne will contact you. Not the Thorne you met in Atlanta. That was his nephew, the one my mother controls. You are looking for the senior partner, Arthur Thorne. He holds the keys to everything. Trust no one else. Do not contact my mother. Do not tell Francine you are leaving. Disappear, Layla. Let them think you are rotting in the swamp. I love you. I have loved you since the moment you spilled coffee on me. I have spent the last 4 years building a wall around you that they can never breach. You just have to walk through the door. Be brave. Go to London. Forever yours. Blake. I sat there for a long time staring at his signature. The ink was blue. He always used blue ink. Be brave, I whispered. Easy for you to say. You're dead. I picked up the boarding pass again. London. I had never been to Europe. I didn't even have a passport. Wait. I scrambled for the bag again. I tore through the side pockets. There, tucked in a zippered compartment I had missed, was my passport. It had been missing for 6 months. I thought I had lost it during the move. Blake had helped me look for it and then told me not to worry, that we'd get a replacement eventually. He had stolen it. He had stolen my passport to ensure I would have it when he died. The level of manipulation was staggering. It made me feel sick, but it also made me feel protected in a twisted, dark way. He had played a long game, a game against his own mother. But what if I didn't go? I looked around the rotting room, the peeling wallpaper, the smell of mold. If I stayed, I had $20 and a house that was falling down. I had no car, no job, no friends who would return my calls. I would freeze or starve within a week. If I went, London. A strange city. A lawyer I didn't know. What if this Arthur Thorne wasn't there? What if the ticket was canceled? What if I got to Heathrow and was arrested for carrying 5,000 pounds in cash? Disappear, he had written. I looked at the burner phone. I pressed the power button. It buzzed to life. The battery was at 80%. I didn't turn it on fully. I didn't want to connect to a tower yet. Paranoia was contagious, and I had caught it from Blake's letter. I stood up. My legs were stiff. I ate another bite of the ration bar. It sat heavy in my stomach. I had to go. Not because I trusted the plan completely, but because I had no other option. Staying here was a slow death. London was a gamble. I would take the gamble. But I wasn't going to leave quietly. I walked over to the window where the jasmine plant sat. No, wait. There was no jasmine plant here. That was in my head, a memory of our garden. Here, there was only dust. I took the ceramic shards of Sir Barkaby. I placed them on the windowsill, a little memorial to the old life. Goodbye, dog, I said. I'm going to see a man about an empire. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the world was still a gray, dripping mess. I had spent the night awake, guarding the bag like a dragon guarding gold. I had counted the money 3 times, 5,200 pounds, plus the $20 in my pocket. Now I had a logistical nightmare. I was 20 miles from the nearest airport shuttle and probably 50 miles from Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson. I had no car, no cell service to call Uber. I had to walk. I looked at my luggage. I had the rolling suitcase I had arrived with, filled with my old clothes, and the heavy duffel bag. I couldn't carry both. I made a ruthless decision. I opened the suitcase. I took out my wedding photo, the heavy winter coat, and one clean sweater. I put them on. The rest, the jeans, the t-shirts, the sneakers, I left. I zipped the suitcase shut and left it in the middle of the room. It was a decoy. If Camilla sent someone to check on me, it would look like I was still here, maybe out for a walk. I shouldered the duffel bag. It dug into my shoulder, heavy and awkward. I put the passport and the cash in the inside pocket of my coat, zipped tight. I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold, biting my cheeks. I started walking. The dirt road was a quagmire of red Georgia clay. Every step was a battle. The mud sucked at my shoes, trying to pull them off my feet. I slipped twice in the first mile, landing on my knees, coating my jeans in slime. Just keep moving, I panted. One foot, then the other. I walked for 2 hours. My shoulders screamed. My feet were blistered. I was sweating under the heavy coat, but freezing if I unzipped it. Finally, I heard the sound of tires on asphalt, the main road. I emerged from the tree line like a swamp creature. I was covered in mud, hair plastered to my face, carrying a tactical bag. I stood on the shoulder of the 2-lane highway, my heart pounding. I checked the burner phone, 1 bar of service. I dialed the number for a local taxi company I had memorized from the airport driver's dashboard yesterday. "Yellow cab," a bored voice answered. "I need a ride," I said, my voice raspy. "I'm on Route 9 near the turnoff for Blackwood Road." "Blackwood? That's the middle of nowhere, lady. It'll be a 40-minute wait, and I need a credit card on file." "I have cash," I said. "I have plenty of cash." "Driver won't like that," the dispatcher said. "Tell him I'll tip him $50 if he's here in 30 minutes. There was a pause. "What color is your jacket?" "Black," I said, "and I'm the only person standing in the mud." The taxi driver had looked at me like I was an axe murderer, but $50 is $50. He drove me to Hartsfield-Jackson in silence, glancing at the partition every few minutes as if checking that I hadn't pulled a knife. I had him drop me at the international terminal. I walked through the sliding glass doors and the noise hit me. A wall of announcements, rolling wheels, and chatter. It was overwhelming after the silence of the woods. I felt incredibly exposed. I was dirty. There was dried mud on my knees. My hair was a disaster. I was carrying a military-style duffel bag and wearing a coat that looked like I slept in it, because I had. People stared. A woman in a pristine beige trench coat gave me a wide berth, pulling her Louis Vuitton bag closer to her body. I kept my head down and walked toward the check-in counters. I scanned the screens. British Airways. First class. I approached the counter. The line for economy was a mile long, snaking back and forth. The first-class lane was empty, blocked by a velvet rope and a red carpet. I hesitated. I looked like a vagrant. If I stepped onto that red carpet, security would probably tackle me. "Can I help you, miss?" A uniformed agent was standing at the entrance to the lane. He was looking at my muddy shoes with an expression of polite horror. "I'm checking in," I said, trying to sound like I belonged, "for the 6 o'clock to London." "This is the first-class check-in," he said slowly, as if speaking to a child. "Economy is down at the other end." "I know," I said. I reached into my muddy coat pocket and pulled out the passport with the boarding pass tucked inside. I handed it to him. He took it gingerly, holding it by the corner. He glanced at the name, then at his tablet. His eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. He typed something quickly. "Mrs. Hartley?" he asked. The tone of his voice changed instantly. It wasn't warmer exactly, but it was respectful. The respect money buys. "Yes," I said. "My apologies," he said, unclipping the velvet rope. "Right this way, Mr. Hartley." "Oh, I see." "My condolences." He had seen the note on the file. Widow. Or maybe VIP. "Thank you," I said. I walked onto the red carpet. My muddy sneakers left faint prints on the plush fabric. I felt a surge of hysterical laughter bubbling in my chest. If Camilla could see me now, polluting the sacred space of the elite with my swamp mud, she would have a stroke. I reached the desk. The agent behind the counter didn't even blink at my appearance. She just smiled that terrifyingly professional smile. "Passport, please. Checking bags?" "Just this one." I heaved the duffel onto the scale. "Perfect. You're all set, Mrs. Hartley. You have access to the Concord Lounge through security. They have showers if you'd like to. Freshen up before the flight." It was a polite way of saying, "You smell like a wet dog." "I would love that," I said. I took my boarding pass. I walked toward security. I didn't look back at the doors. I didn't look back at Atlanta. I was a ghost leaving the graveyard. The shower in the airport lounge had felt like a baptism. I had scrubbed the Georgia red clay from my skin until I was raw, watching the brown water swirl down the drain. I washed my hair 3 times with the free designer shampoo. I put on the clean sweater and the black trousers I had worn to the funeral, the only clean things I had left. Now I was strapped into a leather seat that was wider than my dining chairs back home. A flight attendant named Sarah, who had a smile that didn't reach her eyes, placed a glass of champagne on the linen tablecloth in front of me. "For you, Mrs. Hartley. Pre-departure beverage?" "Thank you," I said. My voice sounded brittle. I didn't drink it. I stared at the bubbles rising in the glass. I looked around the cabin. There were only 8 seats in first class. Across from me, a man in a bespoke suit was typing furiously on a laptop. Behind me, someone was speaking in hushed Russian on a phone. I felt like a fraud. I felt like a child who had snuck into a movie theater. I reached into my pocket and touched the burner phone. I had turned it on for just a second in the lounge to check for messages. There was one from Francine. "Mother is worried you haven't responded. We're sending a contractor out on Tuesday to assess the roof. Don't be difficult, Layla. Let him in. We're trying to make sure you're safe." I wanted to laugh. They weren't sending a contractor to fix the roof. They were sending someone to see if the rat had drowned yet. assess the roof. It was code for assess the property value for a tax write-off. I closed my eyes as the plane began to taxi. The engines roared to life, a deep vibration that rattled my teeth. Tuesday, I thought. By Tuesday, I'll be gone. But where was I going? To a lawyer I didn't know? To a city where I knew no one? What if Blake had lost his mind at the end? What if this was all a delusion brought on by hypoxia? The plane accelerated. I gripped the armrests. G-force pressed me back into the seat. I watched the runway lights blur into streaks of white. We lifted off. Atlanta fell away beneath us, a grid of yellow lights drowning in the rain. Somewhere down there, in the dark patches between the suburbs, was the shack. And somewhere in the bright, wealthy cluster to the north was the mansion where Camilla was probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of her new, unencumbered estate. "Goodbye," I whispered. Heathrow Airport was a gray beast of glass and steel. It was raining here, too, a polite, persistent British drizzle that was different from the violent storms in Georgia. I cleared customs in a daze. The officer had looked at my passport, then at me, asked how long I was staying, and stamped it without a second glance. No alarms, no police tackling me for carrying 5,000 pounds in cash. I walked into the arrivals hall. It was a sea of people holding signs. Smith, Jones. Taxi for hotel. And then I saw it. A man in a dark gray suit, standing perfectly still amidst the chaos, holding a tablet with a single name in bold white letters. Mrs. L. Hartley. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was real. I walked up to him. He was tall, thick-necked, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He saw me approaching and lowered the tablet. "Mrs. Hartley?" he asked. His accent was East London, clipped and rough, but his tone was respectful. "Yes," I said, "I'm David. Mr. Thorne sent me." He didn't offer a handshake. He reached for my duffel bag. "I can get it," I said, tightening my grip on the strap. The money was in there. "I insist, ma'am," he said. He didn't pull it away, but he held his hand out, waiting. It wasn't a request, it was protocol. I handed it over. He slung it over his shoulder effortlessly and gestured toward the exit. "Car's this way." We walked out into the cool, damp air. A sleek black sedan was idling at the curb. Not a taxi, a Mercedes. David opened the back door for me. I slid onto the leather seat. It smelled of peppermint and new money. We pulled out into traffic. I watched the city go by. Black cabs, red buses, buildings that looked older than my entire country. I felt a wave of crushing loneliness. Blake had been here. He had walked these streets. He had built this secret life here, and he had never told me. "Where are we going?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. David met my eyes in the rearview mirror. "The city, ma'am. Mr. Thorne's office is at 1 Canada Square. Is he expecting me right now?" I looked at my watch. It was 10 in the morning, London time. I had barely slept on the plane. He cleared his schedule for the day, David said. Cleared his schedule. For me? For the waitress from Atlanta? 1 Canada Square was a monolith. A pyramid-topped tower that pierced the gray clouds, surrounded by the steel canyons of Canary Wharf. It looked like a fortress for people who owned the world. David drove into an underground parking garage that required a key card just to enter. He parked in a spot marked Reserved DL Global. DL, I whispered. Dunn Logistics? That was the name of the shell company Thorne had mentioned in the letter? No, wait, the letter hadn't named the company. It just said Dunn. David led me to a private elevator. There were no buttons inside, just a card reader. He tapped a pass, and we shot upward. My ears popped. We kept going up. 40 floors, 50. The doors slid open. I stepped out into a reception area that was quieter than a library. The carpet was thick enough to swallow my shoes. The walls were glass, offering a panoramic view of the River Thames snaking through the city below. A receptionist with perfect hair sat behind a desk made of white marble. She looked up as I entered. Her eyes flicked over my rumpled sweater, my lack of makeup, my general air of exhaustion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her hand hovering over a phone. "Mrs. Hartley, to see Mr. Thorne," David said from behind me. The receptionist's demeanor changed instantly. "Oh, of course. My apologies, Mrs. Hartley. He's waiting for you in the boardroom. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Water," I said. My mouth was dry as dust. "Right away." David nodded to me. "I'll leave your bag in the secure cloakroom, ma'am." "No," I said sharply. "I keep the bag." David paused. He looked at the duffel, then at me. "Very well." He handed it to me. I clutched it to my chest like a shield. The boardroom was at the end of a long glass corridor. The receptionist opened the heavy oak door and ushered me inside. It was a vast room, dominated by a table that could seat 20. At the far end, looking out the window, stood a man. He turned as I entered. Arthur Thorne was nothing like the nervous, sweaty lawyer in Atlanta. This man was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than my parents' house. He had eyes that were sharp, blue, and terrifyingly intelligent. "Mrs. Hartley," he said. He didn't smile. He walked toward me with a steady, predatory grace. He extended a hand. "Arthur Thorne." I shook it. His grip was dry and firm. "You made it," he said. "I wasn't sure if you would." "Blake said I had to," I said. "He said you were the only one I could trust." Thorne studied me. He was dissecting me with his eyes, my fear, my fatigue, my determination. "Trust is earned," he said softly. "Please sit." He gestured to a chair at the head of the table. I sat. He sat to my right, placing a thick leather folio on the table between us. "Before we begin," Thorne said, folding his hands, "I need to verify your identity. Strict protocol." Blake insisted. "I have my passport." I reached for my pocket. "Passports can be stolen," Thorne said. "I have a question, one that only Blake's wife would know the answer to." I swallowed. "Okay." "On your honeymoon in Scotland," Thorne said, his eyes locking onto mine, "you stayed at a bed and breakfast in the Highlands. It rained for 3 days straight. What did Blake buy you from the gift shop in the lobby to cheer you up?" I froze. The memory washed over me. The rain against the window, the smell of peat fire. Blake coming in, soaking wet, holding a small paper bag. "He didn't buy it from the gift shop," I said quietly. "The shop was closed. He bought it from the owner's daughter. It was a pair of hand-knitted socks, bright yellow. He said they were sunshine for my feet." Thorne stared at me for a long second. Then the corner of his mouth twitched, a ghost of a smile. "Sunshine for your feet," he repeated. "Correct." He opened the leather folio. "Welcome to London, Mrs. Hartley. We have a lot of work to do." Thorne slid a document across the table. It was bound in red plastic. "Let's start with what you left behind," he said. "The Hartley family estate." I looked at the cover. "Asset valuation, Hartley Enterprises." "I know," I said. "They have everything. The mansion, the company, the accounts." "They have the appearance of everything," Thorne corrected. "Blake spent the last 4 years carefully, legally, and systematically dismantling Hartley Enterprises from the inside out." I blinked. "What?" "Open it to page 4, Thorne instructed. I flipped the pages. I saw rows of numbers. Most of them were in parentheses. Negative numbers. "The mansion," Thorne said, pointing to a line item, "heavily leveraged. Blake took out 3 mortgages on it to fund expansion projects that never existed. The debt service alone is $40,000 a month. The accounts are empty, Layla. The company is bleeding cash. The investment portfolio Francine was so excited about, it's filled with high-risk, long-term bonds that are currently worthless if liquidated." I stared at the numbers. "But they're rich. They spend money like water." "They spend credit," Thorne said. "And the credit lines died with Blake. He kept the payments current while he was alive to maintain the illusion. Now that he's gone, the payments stop. The banks will call the loans within 30 days. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. They don't know? Not yet, Thorne said. They think they've won the lottery. In reality, they've inherited a bomb with a very short fuse. I thought of Camilla's text. Hope you're settling in. She was gloating over a victory that was actually her execution. Why? I asked. Why would he destroy his own family's legacy? Because he knew they would destroy you, Thorne said simply. He knew that if he left you money, they would sue you until you were bankrupt. They would drag you through court for a decade. The only way to keep you safe was to give them a target so big they wouldn't notice you slipping out the back door. He made me a decoy, I whispered. He made me the distraction. He made you safe, Thorne said, but that is only half the story. Thorne reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second folder. This one was bound in black leather embossed with silver letters. DL Global. Blake didn't just burn the money, Thorne said. He moved it. Every loan, every liquidated asset, every bad investment. It was all funneled here, into a new entity. He slid the black folder toward me. DL Global, I read. What is this? Dunn Logistics, Data and Logistics, or, as Blake liked to call it privately, Dear Layla. My breath hitched. It's a holding company, Thorne explained. Registered in the Cayman Islands, headquartered here in London. It owns shipping containers. It owns warehouses in Rotterdam and Singapore. It holds patents for logistics software that Amazon is currently licensing. He flipped the folder open. This is the current valuation. I looked at the number at the bottom of the page. I had to count the commas to make sure I was seeing it right. Total assets, £42,500,000. I pushed my chair back. It made a harsh scraping sound on the floor. No, I said. That's impossible. It is very possible, Thorne said. Blake was a brilliant businessman, Layla. When he wasn't being suffocated by his mother's demands, he was a genius. He built this in 4 years. For you. I can't. I stood up, panic rising in my throat. I was a waitress. I count tips. I can't run a 40 million pound company. I don't know anything about shipping containers. Sit down, Mrs. Hartley. Thorne's voice was sharp. It wasn't a suggestion. I stopped. I looked at him. You are not a waitress, Thorne said firmly. You are the sole shareholder and chairwoman of the board of DL Global. You don't need to know how to load a container. You have people for that. I am your chief legal officer. We have a CFO. We have a COO. Then what do? I asked, my voice trembling. You learn, Thorne said. You take the next 3 months. We hide you here. We teach you. And when the time is right, when the Hartley estate in Atlanta burns to the ground, you decide if you want to extend a hand to help them or if you want to let them burn. He leaned forward. Blake didn't leave you a shack, Layla. He left you a loaded gun. The question is, are you brave enough to hold it? I looked at the black folder. Dear Layla. I thought of the mud on my shoes. I thought of the way Francine had looked at me when she took my wedding photo frame. I thought of the charity of the eviction. Slowly, I sat back down. I placed my hand on the black folder. Teach me, I said. The next 3 months were not a montage of shopping sprees and champagne. They were the hardest, darkest months of my life. I didn't see London. I saw the inside of the corporate apartment Thorne had secured for me, a sterile glass box in Canary Wharf, and the inside of the boardroom. I woke up at 5 in the morning. I went to sleep at midnight. In between, I drowned in information. Thorne hired a tutor for me, a retired economics professor from Oxford named Dr. Aris. He was ruthless. He didn't care that I was a widow. He cared that I didn't know the difference between gross margin and net profit. Again, he would snap, tapping the whiteboard with a marker. If the fuel surcharge increases by 3%, what happens to the Rotterdam manifest? The margin drops. I rubbed my temples, my eyes burning. We lose. £2,000 per container? Wrong. We lose 4,000 because of the currency exchange rate impacts on the euro. Pay attention, Layla. This isn't a game. This is people's livelihoods. I cried in the bathroom a lot. I would lock the door, turn on the tap so no one could hear, and sob into a towel. I felt like an imposter. I felt like a child wearing her mother's high heels. I wanted to quit. I wanted to take the money and run to a beach somewhere. But then I would remember Francine taking my picture frame. I would remember Camilla telling me I was a phase. And I would wash my face, put on the expensive moisturizer Thorne's assistant had bought for me, and walk back into the study. Teach me about currency hedging, I would say. I learned the hard way. I read contracts until the words blurred. I looked up every legal term I didn't know. I forced my brain to rewire itself from customer service to corporate strategy. It wasn't magic. It was a grind. It was staring at a spreadsheet until the numbers stopped looking like enemies and started looking like a map. The day of my first real board meeting, my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't fasten my watch. It was a Cartier tank watch, vintage. I had bought it myself with my first dividend check. It was the only luxury item I owned. The rest of my money sat in the bank, untouched. I walked into the boardroom. 12 men and 3 women turned to look at me. They knew who I was, the widow, the surprise heir. I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They expected a puppet. They expected Thorne to do the talking while I nodded and looked pretty. Thorne sat at the end of the table, silent. He was letting me sink or swim. "The Tokyo expansion," the COO, a man named Henderson, began. He pulled up a slide. "We're looking at a 14% reduction in overhead if we switch to automated cranes in the new terminal." I looked at the data. I had studied this file for 6 hours last night. "The automation saves money," I said. My voice was quiet. I cleared my throat and spoke louder. "It saves money on paper, but the contract with the local union in Tokyo has a clause about minimum staffing levels. If we automate, we breach the contract. The penalty fees are triple the savings." Silence. Henderson frowned. He clicked through his slides. He scrolled down to the fine print. He stopped. He looked at the screen, then at me. "She's right," the CFO murmured. "Clause 44B, I missed that." Henderson turned red. "Well, we can renegotiate." "No," I said, feeling a sudden surge of adrenaline. "We honor the contract. Blake, my husband built this company on reliability. If we break faith with the unions, we lose the port. We keep the staff. We find savings elsewhere. Look at the fuel logistics for the return trips. We're running empty containers back to Singapore. Fill them with scrap exports. The margin is low, but it covers the fuel." The room was quiet for a long moment. I held my breath. Had I overstepped? Was I talking nonsense? Then the CFO nodded. "Scrap exports, that works. It covers the fuel cost entirely." Thorne looked at me from the end of the table. He didn't smile, but he gave a nearly imperceptible nod. I didn't feel like a fraud anymore. I felt like the woman who used to manage 6 tables during the dinner rush without dropping a plate. It was the same skill. Keep track of everything, don't panic, and find the solution that keeps the house running. 3 months and 4 days after I left Atlanta, I was sitting in my office, my actual office with my name on the door, when Thorne walked in without knocking. He was holding a tablet. "It's happening," he said. He placed the tablet on my desk. It was a digital article from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. "Hartley Mansion seized in shock for closure." I picked it up. My hands were steady this time. "The banks moved in this morning," Thorne said. "Sheriff's deputies served the eviction notice at 9 a.m. They gave them 2 hours to vacate." 2 hours, I whispered. "They gave me 24. "The banks are less sentimental than family," Thorne noted dryly. I read the article. Socialite Camilla Hartley was seen leaving the historic property in a taxi, accompanied by her daughter. Sources say the estate is riddled with debt, estimated at over $15 million. Where are they? I asked. They're staying at a Motel 6 on the outskirts of the city, Thorne said. Their credit cards have been frozen. The cars were leased. They were repossessed last week. They have nothing, Layla. Actually, less than nothing. They have significant legal exposure for the unpaid loans. I walked to the window. The Thames was gray and churning below. I tried to find the satisfaction I had dreamed of in the swamp. I tried to feel the glee of revenge, but mostly I just felt a cold, final resolution. The monster wasn't scary anymore. It was just a sad, broke old woman in a motel room. Do they know about me? I asked. They know you're gone, Thorne said. They don't know where, but... He paused. Camilla has been calling your old number, the one we diverted. Does she leave messages? 17 of them, today. I turned back to the desk. Give me the phone. I sat in the leather chair that cost more than my father's car. I placed the burner phone on the desk. It was plugged into a secure line now, encrypted. I dialed the number for the Motel 6 that Thorne had provided. Motel 6, front desk. Connect me to room... I looked at Thorne. 114, he supplied. Room 114, please. The line clicked. It rang 4 times. Then a voice answered. It wasn't the imperious voice of the matriarch. It was small, shaky, and sounded like it had been crying. Hello? Hello, Camilla, I said. There was a gasp. Layla? Layla, oh my God, where are you? We've been worried sick. We thought you were dead in that swamp. I'm fine, I said calmly. I'm in London. London? Her voice sharpened, the old edge returning for a second before she remembered her situation. What are you doing in London? How did you... Never mind. Layla, listen to me. Something terrible has happened, a mistake, a banking error. It wasn't an error, Camilla, I said. It was leverage. Blake mortgaged everything. Silence. You knew? I know everything, I said. I know about the 3 mortgages. I know about the failed investments in tech startups. I know you're currently in a motel because you don't have $20 to your name. We are destitute, Camilla wailed. The facade cracked completely. They took the house, Layla. They took my jewelry. Francine is... She's having a breakdown. We have nowhere to go. You have to help us. Your family. Family, I repeated, like when you gave me 24 hours to pack, like when you told me I was a phase. I was stressed, Camilla pleaded. I was grieving. You know how I get. Please, Layla. Blake would have wanted you to take care of us. Blake is the one who did this to you, I said. He set the trap, Camilla. I just watched it spring. She went silent. I could hear Francine sobbing in the background. Why? She whispered. Because he knew you, I said. He knew you would eat me alive if he left me vulnerable, so he made sure you choked. We'll sue. Francine's voice came over the line, screeching. She must have grabbed the phone. We'll find you and we'll sue you for everything you have. With what money? I asked gently. Lawyers cost $500 an hour, Francine. You don't have 500 cents. We'll go to the press. And tell them what? I asked. That you bullied a widow and got outsmarted by her dead husband? Go ahead. I own the narrative now. There was a scuffle, and Camilla came back on the line. Layla, please. I'm an old woman. I can't live like this. I looked at the view of London. I thought about the power I held. I could leave them there. I could hang up and never speak to them again. They would survive. People survive poverty every day. I had done it, but that wasn't enough. I wanted them to remember. I wanted them to live every day knowing exactly who held the leash. I have a proposition, I said. Anything. Camilla breathed. I've purchased the debt on the Wolf Creek property. I lied. I hadn't yet, but I would in 5 minutes. It's mine, free and clear. The shack? The property, I corrected, using her own word. It has a roof. It has walls. It has running water. I fixed the plumbing myself. It's more than most people have. You want us to live in the swamp? Camilla sounded horrified. I'm offering you a home, Camilla, rent-free, and I will provide a monthly stipend of $2,000 for food and essentials. It's enough to survive. It's not enough for Chanel, but it's enough for Walmart. $2,000? That won't even cover my prescriptions. Then get generics, I said. That's the offer. You move to Wolf Creek. You live in the house you were so generous to give me. And you never, ever speak to the press or try to contact me again. If you do, the stipend stops, and I evict you in 24 hours. This is cruel, she wept. This is so cruel. No, Camilla, I said, my voice steady and cold. This is benevolence. I'm helping you find a simpler life. I think you'll find it so much more you. I waited. I let the silence stretch across the Atlantic Ocean. I let them do the math, the street or the swamp. We accept, Camilla whispered. She sounded broken. Good, I said. The key is under the mat. Watch out for the loose board in the upstairs bedroom. It's a doozy. Layla, she started, her voice wavering. Did he really hate us that much? I closed my eyes. He didn't hate you, Camilla. He just loved me more, and he knew you couldn't coexist. Goodbye, Layla. Goodbye, Camilla. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the air conditioning. I felt lighter. The weight that had been pressing on my chest since the funeral was gone. Thorne was watching me. Generous, he commented. $2,000 a month. It's survival, I said. I'm not a monster. I won't let them starve. But I won't let them rule either. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds over London, casting a golden light on the river. What now, Mrs. Hartley? Thorne asked. We have the acquisition meeting at 2. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I didn't see the scared waitress anymore. I didn't see the grieving widow. I saw someone new, someone forged in the fire of betrayal and quenched in the cold rain of a Georgia swamp. I turned to him and smiled, a real smile. Let's go buy a shipping company, I said. 3 months later. It has been 6 months since I left Atlanta. Life is different. I live in a townhouse in Kensington now. I have a garden filled with jasmine. It's thriving. I'm still learning every day. I still make mistakes in meetings, but I don't cry in the bathroom anymore. I own my mistakes and I fix them. Thorne says I have Blake's instincts, but my own conscience. As for Camilla and Francine, I have a property manager in Georgia who checks on the Wolf Creek house once a month. He sends me photos. The latest report shows that Francine has started a small garden in the backyard. She's growing tomatoes. Camilla was seen at the local Dollar General, buying yarn. She's knitting. They hate it. I know they hate it. They hate the mud. They hate the isolation. And they hate that their monthly check comes from the Hartley Trust, signed by me. But they are surviving. They are learning, for the first time in their lives, what it actually costs to be alive. Sometimes, late at night, I look at the ceramic dog, or what's left of it, which I keep in a velvet box on my desk. I think about Blake. I miss him every day. But I'm not angry anymore. He gave me a choice. He gave me a key. He didn't just leave me an empire. He left me the chance to become the woman who could run it, and I built something beautiful, just like he asked. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here,